Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 93 for Friday, October 4th, 2024. My name is Justin Young. Joining me as always is Mario Sanders. Mario, how are you?
I'm doing okay.
Anything exciting going on this week, Mario?
On Monday, I drove out to Evansville and went to Raw for WWE. So that was
did
fun.
you?
I did, yeah. It's in St. Louis this upcoming Monday. I'm going again on this upcoming Monday.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so I'm looking forward to this upcoming week as well.
So did you go with someone or did you just go by yourself?
I went by myself.
Did you hold up a sign?
I had no sign. There were definitely signs there, but I had no such sign.
My understanding is I don't know if they do this anymore, but like for a while there, they were really cracking down on the signs and trying to get people to stop bringing them in.
I think they're starting to embrace the sign culture that was like huge, especially during the Attitude Era.
Right.
You're seeing a lot more signs, and they even had like, during when would be a commercial break and they do just like every sports stadium, like which car is going to make it to the finish line first? They had something similar to that, but they had here are the best signs out in the crowd today. So they were like showing off the signs on like the Jumbotron and stuff like that. So I think, they're embracing the signs.
Well, okay. WWE is like the most fickle, entertainment property I can imagine. It feels like, okay, we are all in on this for the next 3 months. And then in 3 months, they'll just completely do a 180 and be like, no, we're not doing that at all anymore. What's wrong with you people?
I think that is especially characteristic of the Vince McMahon WWE.
Sure.
Everybody, former wrestlers, current wrestlers have said that it was just always so chaotic. And now under Triple H, it's much more, not rigid, but like there's a structure to
Right.
it. It's far less chaotic than it was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was the case with like the more operation side. I knew the storytelling side, people had said he was much more like not changing his mind at the last minute and completely rescripting things on wrestlers.
Oh, I just sort of assume it's everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always weird because you don't know how much of that to blame on Vince and how much
Sure.
of that was like people under him who were either crazy or incompetent or a combination thereof.
Sure.
So, that's interesting. Cool. So we should watch Raw to see if we see you.
I mean, last week I definitely got a very small glimpse just because the Evansville Stadium is not that big, but I
Right.
think I'm up in like the literal last row for this one up at Enterprise, and that's a much bigger stadium.
Yeah. All right. Cool. And we have a special guest this week. Scott Jarmon is rejoining us. It's been quite a while since you've been on the podcast, I
It's
think.
like November. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
So-
for having me. It's good to see both of you. I'm excited to have some rousing video game conversation with you all. I did not go to Raw. I don't really have anything nearly as cool or exciting.
I'm slowly making this a wrestling podcast.
Okay.
Every week there's just a little thing.
Well,
I do feel like there is some discussion every week of wrestling. And Scott, for people who maybe didn't hear you last time you were on here, you're still dissertating, correct?
Yes, I'm dissertating. That's
Okay.
where I am in that process, and hopefully will get that done by the end of the year.
And remind us your dissertation. It's on witches, right? Crones.
Yeah, it's on the crone and the figure of the crone, and sort of the crone as an old witch, as an old feminine sort of body that we've read so much into and created a lot of myth about in our society, and I'm sort of looking at more sort of the modern myth making of the crone by looking at Miyazaki and Golden Girls and some of those images there where it's there and it's changed some, especially in sort of a Golden Girls sort of television show, but looking at sort of the power that figure can sort of have and sort of ask, yeah.
Cool. So I've got to ask, are you watching Agatha all along?
I am. I've watched. I think we're me and Shelby are in episode 3.
Right.
Right now, sort of in the middle of episode 3. But yeah.
So does that fit in with your research, I would assume, maybe?
Yeah. It's a little late to just sort of, it's
Right.
at a different time. Like I would have pulled it in, because of the sort of the witch archetypes that are sort of within that show and and sort of what they represent and what they mean. So, but yeah, I'm watching it with interest and liking it so far. I'm having a good time with it. Really liked WandaVision as a show as well, and everything sort of going on there. So
yeah. Cool. So anything exciting been going on? Not going to Raw. Not very few of us can have that level of excitement in our lives. So.
Yeah, just current events in the world that I'm not going to sort of bring into this room and contaminate our podcast with. And then
you'd be surprised how often that happens.
Okay. And then also Shelby and I most recently, over the summer, got a house, and so we're still just sort of in the wow factor of like, we have this now and this is our sort of feeling. So that's been great. That's been fun.
And as a fellow homeowner, like, it's always overwhelming when you buy that house. Like it's all excitement at first, and then all of a sudden you start realizing everything you have to do with a house.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot about everything that's going on in it, in a way that I was never even remotely concerned about with the house that we rented before.
Sure.
So yeah, it's been great. It's been fun.
All right, cool. Well, we should note that Alicia is specifically not here because she is doing her show this weekend. Comically Close. Am I getting the title right?
That sounds right.
So I got confused because I went to it last night, and the name of Famcom 24 is pushed really hard, like as part of the actual show. And so the entire time I was sitting there thinking, like, is the name of this Famcom 24? And I've had the wrong name. I couldn't have the wrong name for this show. I have a poster hanging outside my office. But because it's pushed so hard and it's like so big and prominent, kind of got confused about the name. But I did go see Alicia's show last night. I enjoyed it quite a bit. There was a chance to talk about Sonic the Hedgehog as part of it, which hopefully made Alicia very happy. But it's a good show. And so I know both of you have talked about seeing it this weekend and everything. So I'm sure next week when Alicia is back, we will have some discussion of the show. But yeah, if you're listening to this and you're in town this weekend, go see it. It starts at 7 in the Klein now. All right, why don't we move on to what we've been playing? And Mario, why don't we start with you? What have you been playing recently?
Yeah, so this week I have been playing Castlevania Circle of the Moon. I started it last weekend, maybe a little bit before. My hope is to maybe finish it this weekend if I've got the time. Yeah, and I think that's the first one that they put out for the Game Boy Advance. And
it was like a launch game for the Game Boy Advance.
I don't know that. I'll take your word for it. But it's hard to not...
I will say I got it when I got my Game Boy Advance, which was near launch, so I'm pretty sure it was right there near it.
And I think the hard thing I'm like trying as hard as I can to not compare it to Aria of Sorrow, which was the third one that they put out, and also just like one of my favorite games of all time. One, because I think it would be unfair just because of obviously the amount of time in terms of development that they had and building on it, and just, again, my personal bias towards it. I do think it's good. I definitely have problems with it. I think the very cool thing, so you've played Circle of the Moon then. I think the card system and like the combination of cards in order to give like these unique abilities is quite cool. I think my frustration with it is that they made this one of the central mechanics of the game, but the drop rates on those cards are so low for many of them that, so I was reading about it. Each enemy in the game has 2 different drops, a normal drop and a rare drop. And then for the majority of the enemies, there are maybe 18 cards. I want to say nine. There's like 2 different categories. I want to say 9 of each one. The normal drop and the rare drop for most of the enemies, it's the rare drop, and there are some of them in terms of looking at the drop rates where the card is less than 1%.
Yeah.
And so even though you can boost that a little bit with your luck stat, in order to get some of those cards, you are just farming an enemy over and over and over and over again, if that's something that you want to do. I don't think that any of the cards are required to beat the game, but as a central part of the game, it feels like I would like to collect at least the majority of them. And
Gotta collect them all.
that is what some games would say. And so that is a frustrating part of it. I think that's something that they addressed in Aria of Sorrow, switching over to the soul system. I don't think the drops on the souls are nearly as low. I think the only thing that's different is if you're going for the boss souls, you only have one shot at them. But that's a slight frustration. But other than that, I've had a pretty good time with it.
Yeah, I replayed that about 2 years ago or so. So I played it originally when the Game Boy Advance came out, whenever it launched. I feel like it was definitely like in that first 6 months or so, but like maybe not. But anyways, I played through it, replayed through it. At the time it launched, I remember I felt very disappointed in it because I was wanting the next Symphony of the Night.
Sure.
And it's very much right in that style, and borrowing those graphics and everything. And so it's not that it's not doing the thing that Symphony of the Night did. It's just it could in no way match that game at that time.
Yeah.
I think some of the later portable ones do approach it, or are certainly in that conversation.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So it was very disappointing. And when I went back and replayed it, I actually enjoyed it more because I wasn't going in with those expectations. I kind of already knew what this game was, and viewing it as, and this sounds very dismissive, but as a somewhat lesser Castlevania, like my expectations were more met, and I would, had less of that sense of, oh, this isn't what I was expecting.
And to be fair, a lesser Castlevania is still a pretty dang good. It's still a pretty dang good game.
Well, when you're talking about Symphony of the Night, which is for me one of my favorite video games of all time, it's like saying it's a lesser Zelda.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I would agree with that. Like I said, I think that's kind of been my mentality of not trying to compare it to Aria of Sorrow, which would be essentially, Aria was the first Castlevania game I played. Like I said, it's one of my favorite games of all time. So it's trying not to constantly compare it to that. Otherwise, I will just be very disappointed. But I've had a pretty good time with it. I think the other thing that I've played only a little bit of is Echoes of Wisdom, which I know you've played and you're going to talk about. But I think have you also been playing that? Nice. The one thing, and I won't spoil anything, but I watched the speed run for it, and it's like already down to like 40 minutes. I just saw today that some speedrunner found a way to play as Link in the game, which feels like it defeats the purpose, of course. 45 years of Zelda. Hey, how do we play as Link?
I mean, there is an incel audience that's going to love that.
Well, I guess there's no way to do a run of it because there are certain like echoes that are required.
You can't make me play as a girl. I'll show you.
I guess, from what everybody's saying is that like certain echoes are required to beat the game and they don't know how to overcome that yet. So there's no like Link % run of the game yet. But I did see that on Twitter today. But the speedrun is just wild in terms of they're not really like doing a ton of sequence breaking. They're just wrong warping because with certain items and with, certain abilities, they're able to like climb on top of the trees, and then they're making like this makeshift staircase with like boulders and treasure chests in order to get to like what I assume is a very particular like Y-axis location that when they warp, it takes them to a different location so that when they warp again, they can basically warp into the final dungeon.
Right.
And so it's very weird. The person who I was watching, he's like a multi-time world record holder for different Zelda games. He's said that basically once this run is optimized, he's never going to do it again because it relies way too much on randomness and like AI, like characters and like their abilities. So he's like, I'm not really into it, but it's fun now when we're still figuring it out.
Because of the echoes that you're using.
The echoes, and like I said, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but like when you re-encounter Link later in the game, I guess.
Right.
But and so like relying on but essentially that's what it is. Relying on the echoes to like attack enemies and attack bosses and stuff like that. But it was interesting, and I think it's a fun game. I was joking with you. I thought it was funny. I was on TikTok or Twitter or something, somebody like pretending to be a developer, like, we messed up. We gave them the bed way too early. They're just taking that into boss rooms and sleeping in it to recover all of their hearts. And they're using it as a bridge to cross paths that they're not supposed to. So it's one of those games that I think you had brought it up, and I think it's a fair comparison. Like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, they are giving you all of the tools, but they're also like, do what you will with these things rather than you must go to point A, then point B, then point C.
Yeah, and that like you talking about people, so not like the like skipping of sections, but people breaking elements of it, right? Like this feels like a game. So to put it in a Zelda analogy, this feels like a game where Nintendo has put you into the shop with all the pots to break, and they're like A-okay with that, right? Like they're very happy for you to break this game in lots of interesting ways. They didn't limit it, and they did the same thing, I feel like, particularly in Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like there's stuff in that game they almost immediately, not just the speedrunning community, but almost everybody was like, oh, can I do this really weird thing? And yes, you can. We're not going to limit you.
Especially with like the machines,
Right.
Yeah.
But also like the ascend ability, like there's some weird stuff people were doing with that.
I haven't played Tears, but I've seen little bits of it. Yeah.
The like magic hand ability, right? Like some of that. So this feels like them kind of continuing down that path of, okay, we're going to kind of get out of the way and let you do this. I guess we're just going to talk about this game now, since all three of us have played it. We should all of us discuss it.
Well, and I think the reason that it feels very obvious is like a big part of it is them like walking on top of the trees. And it's like, that feels like that's not an oversight by Nintendo. That's not something that you're just going to miss, especially when like the echoes are, part of it is like making these little staircases. Like you only need to put like one of them on the ground and then you can jump on top of the trees. And so it's like, that's not something that they missed. That had to be something that they knew was possible, or that like testers would have found that almost immediately. And they give you a trampoline like super early in the game as well. So yeah.
Well, not even that they were okay with that or intended for that, but when they saw it, they were like, okay, well, let's not stop this. Let's not break this. We could put an invisible wall around this.
Yeah, this was just about to say. They could have easily walled that off if they didn't want people getting that high up into the level.
Yeah, and I think, that's what's really... I feel like Nintendo made a shift with the Zelda franchise. So I always get the name of this game wrong. What was the 3DS one?
Triforce Heroes.
No, it's the one it's not A Link to the Past. It's
A Link Between Worlds.
A Link Between Worlds. Yes. Thank you. So starting with that game, right? So that's the game where you can rent items and you can kind of approach the dungeons in any direction. I feel like Nintendo said, hey, let's take Zelda and instead of doing the very easy thing of let's just make it an open world, let's make it more open gameplay. And so they did that with that. And then, of course, Breath of the Wild, they really kind of blew that open. Like, okay, you can approach these dungeons and do them in any order in any way that you want. And then Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, they pushed that in even further. And now here they are pushing 2D Zeldas in that sort of like further direction of, hey, let's sort of break the mode of what a Zelda game plays like and looks like.
Well, and I believe this is the same developer as A Link Between Worlds. Grezzo has done a lot of the 2D Zeldas.
They did A Link's Awakening, the remake of that. I know that.
I think they did a lot of the earlier ones as well, at least going back to A Link Between Worlds. So there's definitely, you can see some of that same design ethos, and it's definitely like traveling to the like big 3D ones as well.
Sure.
And I think even, the other example when we were talking about it earlier, you're seeing this across games with, Mario Odyssey. You've got these high platforms and you like get up there thinking, oh, wow, you can get up there. But then there are items up. There's an item box or there are coins up there. It's like, oh, they clearly expected people to try to get up here and succeed in getting to this particular platform. So they know that people are going to mess around and explore and do these weird things. And they're like, yeah, here you go.
Yeah. I mean, I think it shows what makes Nintendo different, right? Like Nintendo could very easily spend all their effort and time on having the best, most quote unquote realistic graphics possible. And Nintendo instead spends that time on how do we make this game into a toy that you're going to want to play around with your abilities. You're going to want to play around with this world. So like Mario Odyssey is that, right? Like, yes, there's something up here and you can figure out how to get up here. And we're going to put some coins up here so you feel rewarded once you've done it. It's not going to be you get up here and there's just nothing. Like, we want you to play around with this. We want you to like try to break the rules of the game. Not so much in like the glitching speedrunning way, though I think they're A-okay with that. But, I think we want the players who are playing this game to treat it like a toy. And to me, this game is even maybe the most they've leaned into that, where the entire ability in this game that the entire game is built around, the echo ability is really just like the most toyish sort of thing possible, right? Like you can clone anything and then combine different cloned items and kind of play with these. And it really feels like, it's almost like Legos that you're playing with.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I do appreciate sort of the mini paths sort of way to sort of that we've seen in the Zeldas, because I feel like as a kid playing through, my first one was like Ocarina of Time, and then I kept it up. I needed a player's guide for all of it, because there was like the one way to sort of get through this thing, and if you missed it or you weren't looking at the right spot on the ceiling to see the switch or whatever it was, you were too bad. You have to look around the room until you spot that switch, and so to have that freedom in the more recent Zelda games, I think has been just marvelous. For the first time, sort of Zelda related, I actually beat the water temple in Ocarina of Time without like a strategy guide or like a walkthrough, and I felt like that was like a huge like I'm a man now, like at 33 years old, finally like feelings really accomplished that I made it through without, and it wasn't easy. I had to go into like I don't know if y'all remember, there's like this loop in the water temple of where different switches in different rooms, so if you mess up, you're gonna have to go back through this entire circuit of the dungeon to sort of get to that level. And had to do that like 5 or 6 times, but because it's just like, where's the one key? There's like one small key that I just need to go forward. I don't know where it is.
I remember the first time playing through that game, getting to the water temple, and first off, just being frustrated by having to raise and lower the water. But I did the same thing. There was one item I was missing, and it was in a very obvious spot, but like I just wasn't ever turning the camera in the right direction.
Yeah.
And it was probably something like a key, but like for whatever reason, I just was not seeing this. And I remember just going through it multiple times in a circle going, what am I supposed to do next? I am obviously missing something, but I have no idea what I am missing.
Yeah. A lot of that, and it may be sort of unpopular, but I do think the 2D Zeldas had a strength to them in terms of that regard, that it took the 3D Zeldas quite a while to catch up on, where it was like, I don't know where to look. I could look at all, like I just have to go into first person camera mode and just look around the room, because I'm, where that 2D is just, you see everything, you see the puzzle, and
Right.
All of the information is sort of there at once, mostly.
So, Scott, you're playing Echoes as well?
Yeah, I haven't played it as much this week as I would have liked to. I'm just be as vague as possible. I'm in the Gerudo area, and I think I'm about to go face the boss of the dungeon in that Gerudo area. But yeah, I've been playing through it. I like it. It's fresh, but still Zelda, and I think that's sort of a big part of it for me. Of like, it still feels like I'm playing through a Zelda game, and it's all there and solid. And yeah, my most used item is the bed. I just like I filter by most used, and I just got the improved bed that heals you a little bit quicker. And that one's slowly still moving up the thing, but because it's 2 costs for the thing instead of 1 cost, like that bed is still just always. I summon it by accident sometimes. I'm just like, well, it's here. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it, come back. So I've been playing Zelda Echoes of Wisdom a little bit. I guess in terms of not just this week, but more recently, I beat Baldur's Gate 3. After probably 100 hours of playing through the campaign. I probably picked it up I put it down about halfway through, and then picked it up more recently, and a friend jumped on with me, and he was my co-op ally, and so he was kind of telling me where to go for things a little bit, and I just, it's wonderful. Have either of y'all played Baldur's Gate 3?
Yeah, I did.
Very little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I've done pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons games before, and this was probably what I felt like the most satisfying computer version of that was still like really well produced and stuff. Like I like the Pathfinder. I don't know if y'all are ever familiar with Pathfinder. It's sort of an off branch of Dungeons and Dragons, but they came out with PC games too, and Move, and it's one of those where it's like it's a pretty faithful recreation of the pen and paper version, but the lower budget of it just kind of oozes through a little bit, where Baldur's Gate's acting, its mocap, its scenes, it's all of that is just so top notch that it's going to be pretty hard to sort of top. And then I've been playing also Star Citizen lately. I jump into it every couple months, usually an update sort of there. Mario did get to see that game a little bit at some point, and you were over and saw that.
Had dinner together.
The spaceship game. That one's cool, and I know you were sort of interested in it last time.
Yeah, I'm always interested in learning more about that game, because my mind is sort of blown by that game.
It is. It's simultaneous. I can give sort of the shorter version of it, but it is one of those of like, it's still such in a rough state that it's hard for me to recommend to people unless they're like, no, I really love space simulator games, and I just want that experience.
Well, I mean, it's Chris Roberts who made the Wing Commander games,
right.
And I loved those games, and I loved TIE Fighter, the Star Wars one, and so when they announced this, I was like, yes, Chris Roberts is making another one of those. Like, that's fantastic news, and that was like 15 years ago, and like $1 billion ago.
Yeah, well, once I don't know what the threshold was, but once it raised probably either 500 million or 600 million, they were like, well, we're going to do an MMO now instead of it was going to be just initially a single player campaign, and then sort of a like multiplayer, hop on with your friends and sort of do other things in the world. But then it became a multiplayer game and an MMO at that, where there's going to be thousands of people in a server or whatever it is. It's not like one server, but it's one that eventually, I'll send you a message giving you a green light, and maybe I don't know if you have a PC at the time, a green light to get into it, because when I think it gets to a point where it is smooth and there's enough sort of features in it, I think it's really gonna blow the pants off of sort of any of the other sort of comparable games. It's just incredible. It's the scale. It's the how big that ship. Like
That's what just started to cut you off. That's exactly what I was just about to say. We spent maybe 30 minutes with it or so, sort of messing around, and you showing me. I just couldn't the depth of all the different things of the nuance of here's this part of the ship, and this is what this does, and this is what that does, and there was so much to it that, I mean, you don't need to. You could get easily overwhelmed very quickly, and then the scale of it of this. Here was this massive ship, and then we're parking it in this
mega massive space station.
Station.
A space station that's probably 20 kilometers sort of long.
Right.
And you know, probably spent 20 minutes just showing you the ship.
Yeah.
And it was a big ship, to be fair. It's a pretty big ship that I had there. And
I was watching some footage of some people playing that, and they were just getting started. So I think one guy had some experience, and he had brought in somebody who was completely new to
That's probably the way to go. Have someone seasoned.
And they were in a mall, and they were just going shopping, and they were going from one store to another. But each store in that mall was fully rendered with different things you could walk around and look at. And I was like, this mall is its own game.
Yeah.
That's how, when you talk about how massive the scale is and everything, I think that was not the game I was imagining when they first pitched this.
Right. And no loading screens at any sort of point unless you die and you resurrect somewhere else, or you get immediately sent to prison. And then when you're in prison, you actually have to wait for you have a certain amount of time based on
cool down.
Yeah, and you either have to work it off or you have to get out. But it's there's a sense also where there's different teams that are basically they've created their own brands in this universe, and so you're seeing branding that has all this sort of a design aesthetic into it, and this impacts the ships, whereas there's a creator in the game called Drake, and you know a Drake ship when you see it. It's much more working class sort of.
It's not the
brand.
rapper Drake, is it?
I don't know what that means. Is that a
the rapper, the singer Drake? He's not also like spaceships.
No,
this revealed here. Drake, the rapper, also huge Star Citizen fan.
I was thinking rapper like
a software rapper or something.
Yeah. I was like, rapper.
I could tell immediately. I was like, I'm pretty sure he knows who Drake is, but I've completely confused him.
Yeah, just sort of a big shift. Just all sort of fantasy sort of brands, which it's a nice sort of sense of immersion sort of within it all, because you have the development teams are trying to outcompete each other with their advertisements that you see in the game or you see on YouTube about the ships or things like that. It's incredible. It feels really great. There's a really advanced physics system to the jets where all the spaceships have 20, 30 thrusters on the ships, and all of them work in real time with physics. So if you get damaged at some point on the ship, that thruster can throw off your balance, sort of thing.
That's cool.
There's real momentum in terms of flying a ship through space. There's that real sense of I am in outer space, and if I get stuck out here, I'm stuck out here. There is no. I either die or I ask somebody to come pick me up, or there's no way for me to just hike it back to civilization. I do not have enough time in my lifespan to get 1 million kilometers to this thing. It's been great. There's big updates sort of coming out. We're finally getting a second solar system getting put into the game, and the solar system is much more supposed to be the Wild West of the game, where PvP is much more of a thing. It's a bigger place. There's less penalties for shooting innocent players and all of those kinds of things. And so that's coming out, and every year we have there's a Star Citizen convention. I don't know where it is all the time, but so that's about to come out, and there's always really interesting tech that's showcasing there in some kind of way, in a way that's like really exciting, and you haven't seen it before necessarily in games all put together into one package. There's a cool video I'll send you that is from last year's, and it's one continuous sort of shot through multiple galaxies. So it ends up being like a continuous shot that's probably like 1 trillion kilometers sort of long, and you do sort of see they put all the features into this one shot, and you see all this really cool stuff and all this cool technology that's sort of been worked on.
I know I've watched a video on YouTube before that was one of their technology updates where they were like showcasing, and again, that was one of those times I looked at it and was like, oh, this is not the game I thought they were making. Like, and I don't even mean that in a negative way. It's just like the scope of it, of what they were working on, was much more massive than what I would have expected.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those like quadruple A titles.
It may be the quadruple A title at this point.
I know Skull and Bones was sort of marketed as
right.
that, but
well, I know what it was. One of the things that got me was the first-person shooter mechanics in it. So they were like showing you getting out of the ship and like going into the first-person mode, but then they were showing, I think you were like interacting with Steam or something, like as you were playing in first-person mode. And I was just like, what is this game? Like, this is more complicated than most first-person shooters.
Yeah.
Like, there's more systems, more interesting stuff going on. And this is in a game that is ostensibly like a space simulator, as you said.
Yeah.
But like they're going that in depth, because like when they first announced I remember when they announced the first person shooter segments, I was like, oh, well, they're just going to take, basic Doom style gameplay and throw it in here, like classic Doom style gameplay. And then seeing how much more, complicated is not the right word, but more advanced than that it is. It was like, oh no, they're making the first person parts as advanced as they're making the space shooter parts, which was surprising to me.
And I still rarely the way I play, I don't even do very much sort of FPS combat, but it is a sense of like all the attachments, which ones do you want, and which, how do you want your sort of build to kind of go in this world, and taking jobs that make it feel like you're actually doing something in this sort of world. It's great. At the same time, it's real rough. They have free fly weekends, which are like, just anybody can hop in without having to pay. They don't really say like, we're actually doing a lot of like server stress tests during those times, because we want more people to come in. So really every time it's free fly, it's a really bad experience where just like elevator buttons aren't working, or I'm not getting the quest that I accepted, and I just either have to wait it out or go play another video game, if that's what I want to do.
Right.
But yeah, so it's one of those of like, if you have the patience for it, it's cool to jump into now. It'll be really just something phenomenal when it finally releases, whenever that is, in another 10 years or so or something.
Well, and I was thinking, like, that would be a really fascinating book someday, the development of that game. I mean, there's been other games that have had books written about them. Doom has Masters of Doom, about kind of its making and id Software. But, like, someday there will be a really fascinating book, because one of the things that I think would be really interesting is to sit down with Roberts and talk to him about, do you regret the like feature creep of this game? Because like this is like the poster child for feature creep, right? Like it's become significantly larger than it was ever pitched as originally.
Yeah, we got like Space Worms announced in like 2017, 2016, and we've just got little flying creatures around, so we're not like anywhere close to some of these things still. And who knows when we will be, But
I wonder at some point, it would be interesting to talk to him and some of the other developers and be like, do you wish you had shipped that simpler game that you originally pitched, which might have been super successful and popular and everything, and then you could have done a sequel that added on more features.
Kept it going there,
yeah. And I think that would be really interesting because, I mean, when does this when does 1.0 of this game ship? And it's still not something, my understanding is they're still not like talking any specific dates.
No, I feel like it's very possible that at this Citizen Con we get maybe more of a release window for the single player. I would expect that. Last year they announced that it was feature complete and they're moving into like the polishing phase of it.
And is that called like Squadron 47 or something?
42, but
42.
Yeah, so there's Squadron 42, and then there's Star Citizen. I guess is referring to more of that multiplayer component of it.
Right.
And
that's the one they like went out and they got like Mark Hamill and other people to
Mark
do
Hamill,
voices.
Mark Strong, I think, is in it. There's a lot of people whose names I don't remember. Gillian Anderson.
Okay.
The Onion Knight from Game of Thrones. You know who I'm talking about.
Right.
You know who that is. A lot of big name actors in this. And I'm sure they're just like, we did the recording for this like 10 years ago, and I have no
Right.
idea what's going on with it.
I mean, like I love Mark Hamill, but Mark Hamill's getting up there in age. Like you got to finish this.
I guess he was good. They're good friends, and they have been sort of Mark Hamill and Chris Roberts had a sort of a Hollywood run doing things, and I think.
Well, Mark Hamill's in part 3 and 4. Like he's in like live action elements of part 3 and 4. A Wing Commander, excuse me.
Yeah.
So when Roberts made those, like he's in those, but he was very much, very much viewed, I think, at that time as like down on his luck actor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was after his career seemed to stall, but before Batman the animated
Before he
series
became a
and
voice actor,
that all took
yeah.
off and became huge for him.
Yeah. It's an interesting company because there is sort of a really sort of unprecedented levels of transparency and communication with the game, where you're getting an update every week, and it's maybe some really jargonistic mumbo jumbo about AI something or other, or something like that. But you're getting those. You're getting videos of developers constantly, sort of 20-minute videos of developers talking about this new feature that's coming in, and being honest about sort of the difficulties of taking this very accurate space simulator and making it into an MMO. And it seems pretty tough. I don't know how tough, but they say they're like, we can't just have a make multiplayer button there that we just we finish something in single player, then we put it in and just translates. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a Herculean task. Like, I know very little about the actual development of games, despite being very much into games.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine, again, just the scope of the project.
Yeah. But it's good. It's good. I enjoy it.
Cool. I'm always interested to hear updates on Star Citizen because it's the sort of game that every once in a while I'll go, I should get into Star Citizen, right? And then I go, oh no, I probably shouldn't. That sounds like a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, it would probably be something you hop into and you go, oh neat, oh I can't do it. There's something impeding me right now.
Right.
And I'll put it down and pick it back up when I see a new ship, a new update or something. I have a ship coming out. I bought a ship probably back in March, and it may be coming out in the next month or so. So
cool.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated by the game. Like I said, I want to play it, but I'm also almost equally fascinated to read the book, the tell-all book about what happened with this game.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about, Scott?
I'm sure it'll come up as we continue. We can.
Okay.
We'll come back to Star Citizen, but other things that pop into my head.
Mario, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Not really.
Okay. I know we kind of transitioned out.
Oh, no.
I didn't want to.
No, not really.
All right. Let's see. So I guess I'll jump in and talk about Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. So last week I said the game started incredibly slow. I still stick by that game, the worst part of it is the beginning. because of all the like, oh, you have to talk to these people and now talk to these people. And it's sort of the way Zelda games used to be. And when you play something like Breath of the Wild, you're like, oh, this is fantastic. Like, let me just play the game. And for this to kind of go back to that is a little slow and frustrating at the beginning. I also feel like there are times in that game where people are talking more than I really care. Like, I don't come to the Zelda games for a deep story. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a me thing. I know some people definitely do, but maybe it's because like I grew up playing the original Zelda games where there's like basically almost no story, and it's just here, go save the princess.
All the deep lore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, I know people like, have you ever seen some of those lore videos where they're like,
I went down a rabbit hole with some of those lore videos. They're like the branching 3 timelines of each of the, I just ate it up one day. I was like, cool. All right.
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I laugh at you saying that because going back to that speed run, like the first 11 minutes of that is just basically cutscenes.
Yeah.
And he's like, the reason I hate this run as well is because if you mess up one of these things, you get 20 minutes into the game, and then the first half of your run is back to being just watching cutscenes.
Right.
Interesting. And 'cause I know the Tears of the Kingdom speedrunners for a while were like, I don't know if y'all have played it, but there's a really sort of slow in terms of like you're kind of just walking through a cave intro that's probably like 10, 15 minutes long. And for a while it was just like, we're starting the speed run after this, but then somebody figured out how to skip it. And so it got sort of put back in.
That's what this runner is like. I don't, not even as a joke, people will hate it, but I am definitely going to make the petition. Can we start the run when you get the rod as compared to having to play through the first Link part and then go through that whole cutscene? Because you get the rod, it's like at 11 minutes, even if you're playing well. And he's just like, or unless they put out a patch that lets you skip the cutscenes, they let you skip the cutscenes, that's fine. But
you can hold A or something.
But I know he's like, and that's kind of I think it sounds like it's just kind of a cutscene heavy game, or like in terms of like dialogue. And Justin, it sounds like, because I assume you're not even just talking about that very, very first part.
No, well, I mean, this later parts with like sort of tips that are coming up and being given to you, and like, hey, there are elements in that game where, hey, you just watched this scene play out. Now we're going to recap that scene and explain to you what you just saw, and you're kind of going, well, I know what I just saw. Like this isn't a super complicated plot. It's a Zelda game.
Yeah, but I know, like I said, with the speed running, they're like the cutscenes whenever like in all dungeons, so that it doesn't use all of those warps. And all dungeons run, it's just the cutscenes. But I think their mentality is mostly like, I don't even care if you make us watch the cutscenes the first time I play the game. Right. The second time or the third time, I should be able to skip through these cutscenes.
Yeah, I very much appreciate the games. So I'm going to talk about Prince of Persia here in a second. But like in that, it plays those cutscenes the second time you're battling a boss or something, but you can hold down a button to skip it.
Yeah.
And to me, every game should do that.
Absolutely.
Like I shouldn't have to watch I appreciate you're very proud of the cutscene. You spent a lot of time and effort on it, but like I shouldn't have to rewatch it over and over again.
I shouldn't need to watch it twice, I think is what it is. The first time, fine, make me watch it, but the second time, at least give me some choice there.
Right.
Sorry to cut off your train of thought there.
So yeah, I mean, I think it, it has a very slow beginning. So I think that's a warning to anybody who's playing this game or thinking of playing it. But once you get past that opening, it opens up a lot. It becomes a much better game. Because that opening, my reaction at first was, I don't know that I'm going to like this. This is kind of already annoying me. I don't like that feeling, 5 minutes into a game, I'm already annoyed with it. But like it very quickly, not very quickly, but once you get past that, it opens up more. I think it becomes a much more enjoyable game. And, I think we've kind of already talked about this, but like just the ability to play around with the game. So I know and it's sort of like a Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom where you're going to, after maybe you finish the game, and I'm not finished with it yet, but you're going to want to go back and watch what people on YouTube are doing or people on TikTok are doing with the game, because you're going to figure out things that you didn't know you could do in the game. So like, I've seen a couple of things just on social media where I was like, oh, that's like, I would have never thought to do that in this game. And so that's been really interesting, because I think it's going to, and this kind of goes back to that idea of being able to skip the cutscenes. It's going to open itself up to be a game you want to replay. Mm-hmm. And like, okay, I played it this way the first time. Now I'm going to play it this way because I learned you could do X, Y, and Z. And so there's one I kind of want to talk about, but I don't want to spoil it because both of you are playing through it right now. There's something you can do in that game that's more devious than you would expect from a Nintendo game.
Okay.
And so I really like that they included it in the game. It makes perfect logical sense, but you do it and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe Nintendo's letting me do this. This is far more cruel than I expect a Nintendo game to be. And I think that's great that sort of stuff is in there. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me an awful lot of Tears of the Kingdom when you're combining items together. So I think that's really cool. And I'm really enjoying it. It's a good game. If you like Zelda games, this is actually entirely worth your time. The other game I want to talk about, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. I've already talked about this game, but I did finally finish it. That game is so much bigger than you think it's going to be. Like, however big you think that game's going to be as a Metroidvania, it is bigger than that. It may be the biggest Metroidvania, 2D Metroidvania at least, that I've ever played. It is a massive game. Even when you beat it, I think I beat it and have been trying to like complete a lot of the like things I skipped over originally. And I think I'm still like only at like 80% of the game. There's just so much to do in it, so many items to find.
Did you happen to, you're playing off of Steam, I assume?
Yes.
Did you happen to check like what your time was when you beat it? Like how many hours played?
Yeah, so it was like early, like low 20s.
Okay.
But I was doing a lot of side stuff,
Sure.
I realized.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of stuff where I was like, oh, I think I need to be more powerful to do this. And then I got there and I was like, oh, no, wait, I probably didn't need to track down all these items to advance. But yeah, I mean, you can easily spend, I guess it depends how fast you're blowing through it, but like you could easily spend 25, 30 hours 100%ing this game.
And on the opposite side, it sounds like you're putting in at the very least 15 hours on a first playthrough.
Yeah. I think if you're not using a guide, you're looking at 15 hours or so.
I mean, we'll say it over and over again. For a $40 game that I've already seen pretty regularly on sale for sometimes 40% off, that's a heck of a lot of game.
I think I paid $22 for it.
Yeah, I think that's what I've seen is about $23, $24 on sale.
I think at $22, I think under $25, it's completely worth the money. Mm-hmm. I mean, I may not say spend $40, but it actually is completely worth $40. Actually, I would say that. But at $20 or under $25, I think it's kind of almost a no-brainer if you like these styles of games. The other thing I'll say is that game gets super crazy near the end when it comes to what it's asking to do platforming-wise. So you gain all these abilities throughout the game, like any Metroidvania. So you're doing stuff like time jump or like double jumping, but then you're also like putting a shadow version of yourself and warping back to it. So you're doing stuff like, hey, you have to jump in front of this block in the background of the wall, and then that makes it pop out and it'll crush you. So you have to actually jump over it to trigger it and put a shadow and then fall down and then trigger the shadow and land on the block as it's coming out. And then you have to jump and use your grappling hook and have the grappling hook propel you upwards. And at the right moment, you have to do your dash move between two spiked walls. But like as soon as you go through those two spiked walls, you have to turn in midair and push back in the direction you just came and land against that wall so that you'll slide down that wall and can jump off of it. And so you're doing that, like, not only for some of the hidden items, but you're doing that as like mainlining the game. You're having to get really good at doing that sort of stuff. And it is you just moving every finger at the same time on the controller, and it gets really complicated. So that game has good difficulty controls that you can turn down the difficulty of the combat if you're not particularly great at the combat. There's nothing to help you if you're not good at the platforming. So I can see that late part of that game getting frustrating for people who don't like platforming in a game. It is much more significant challenge of platforming than any Castlevania game I can think of. It is much more like Celeste. So think of the hardest parts of Celeste, and that game gets to be like the hardest parts of Celeste. I would say
like the A sides.
Yeah, like the bonus content after you beat the game. Is that the A sides?
Oh, really? You'd say it gets even to like so there's the A sides, the B sides, and the C sides of Celeste.
Right. I'm thinking of the epilogue where you go into the cave at the end.
Oh, the core.
Yeah, like it is that level.
Okay.
And so, depending on how difficult you find that, but like I found that challenging to get through.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And so there's a lot of stuff like that in this game.
To go back to the example that was used quite a bit last year, is it the level to the point where OJ was upset with that one Mario level of difficult?
Like nothing in the main line ever got me that frustrated as OJ was frustrated playing through Mario Wonder. But some of the hidden items, there was a point when I finished it, I was like, well, maybe I'll 100% this game and just try to, plow through all of this and collect all these items. There are things that you get near the end of the game that make it easier to find everything. And, but some of those I just got to a point where I was like, I can't physically do this. Yeah. Maybe I'm just dumb and there's an easier way to do it. But I'm looking at it going, I physically cannot move this character in the way that it wants me to.
Well, that's the thing, right? When they give you so many abilities, it becomes so easy to overthink. Well, I need to do these 7 things at once, when in reality, it's like, nah, you really just need to do this one thing. So I could totally see where, not that makes you dumb, but the overthinking becomes really easy.
Well, and some parts, I definitely did that. Some parts I definitely did overthink, and it was easier than I thought. Some of them, I don't know. I just think you have to be doing 4 of those things at least at the same time, and that's really challenging.
Sure.
But if you like that sort of game, if you like Celeste, you like that sort of challenge, there's enough in it that you can get your feel of it just doing the main line of the game and some of the hidden items and objects. But actually 100%ing it is a pretty big challenge, I think, to most people. I'm also older and not as able to tackle games as I once was. So I know we were talking about Ninja Gaiden, and it's I beat Ninja Gaiden when I was a kid, but to go back and do that now, I'm not sure I want to challenge that now.
You just have all the free time in the world.
Yeah. Also, my reflexes were much faster at that time. So, all right, that does it for what we've been playing. Let's move on to the news. And so Nintendo has gotten very lawsuit happy or intimidation happy. Nintendo's going full mafia the last month or so. So they announced they were suing the developers of Power World, the sort of Pokemon knockoff. This week, they shut down, I don't know how this is pronounced, Ryujinx?
No idea.
Ryujinx?
Ryujinx would probably be my guess, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's a reference to Ryu from Street Fighter, but I don't actually know. But anyways, Ryujinx, the Switch emulator, has been shut down supposedly after Nintendo contacted the head developer, and nobody knows what happened with that contact. I saw some people speculating. They're like, did they offer him money? Hey, shut this down. We'll give you X amount of dollars. Did they say, hey,
Sleeping with the fishes.
yeah. Or did they threaten, hey, we might sue you if you keep this up. And if we sue you, like, we're not going to back down. So at very least, you're going to run up, lawyer costs and everything that you probably don't have. So this is the second emulator that they have shut down. So back in May, they shut down the Yuzu Switch emulator. That one, they actually did threaten to sue them. We don't know in this case how Nintendo got them to shut this down, but that's 2 emulators that Nintendo has shut down this year. We often talk on here that emulation is the only way to preserve games in a lot of cases. So emulation is inherently a good thing, and it's also like technically not illegal to like make an emulator. Like that's perfectly legal. It's the ROMs, like distributing the ROMs, that's actually where you get into legal issues. So this seems like Nintendo kind of just being a bully, which seems bad for the game industry.
Yeah. I think they'll only, and I know it's like the basic argument, and I don't feel bad for Nintendo, but I can understand their argument of these two in particular creating loss as compared to like an N64 emulator, where it's like, we're not making any money off of those games anyways.
Right.
I guess you've got like the virtual console, but that seems like a bit of a stretch. Whereas people playing Echoes of Wisdom on Yuzu or this other one is like actual loss to our company. And I could see, I don't know, a judge agreeing with that. So like I can understand that argument. At the same time, I'm like, once we move into this, whatever, again, the next Switch 2, whatever it's going to be, my hope is that they would lighten up on emulators, at least for a previous console generation.
Right.
Of a current console generation, again, I can understand it to an extent. But once we're looking at like previous console generations where the only way to potentially get a Switch is like on a secondhand market at a, the pawn shop or the thrift shop, as like a used thing. At that point, it's like, well, what are we really doing here?
Right.
Yeah, I was somewhat maybe along the same sort of lines. Was thinking about the Switch 2 and everything we seem to know. It feels like I've known so much about the Switch 2 for like 5 years now, and it still hasn't. We don't even have like an official image from it.
We think we know stuff, but
Yeah,
like we don't actually know
we have
at the end of the
3D
day.
images that somebody created off of their memory. We have all these spec leaks, but one of them that I think has been sort of within all those leaks is that there will be backwards compatibility with Switch 1, and I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with that, where you're going to be getting a number of Nintendo titles that get some kind of Switch 2, maybe even like update, and you can finally play Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom at 60 frames per second or something like that.
Or Echoes of Wisdom, because it has some frame rate issues.
Especially in towns and stuff like that,
Right.
yeah. So wondering if it has to do with that, of like, yeah, we don't want anybody playing Zelda at higher than 30 frames per second, because that's going to be how we probably sell people on some new console a little bit,
And that has already been happening, right? Like people are using these emulators to run, Tears of the Kingdom at 60 frames a second and 4K up res. So, I mean, I understand that, right? Like, and I am a big proponent of you should not emulate current console generation games, right? Unless you're doing it like you've already purchased a copy and you're doing it because you want to play everything on your Steam Deck while you're traveling or something, then I don't have a real problem with that. But like things that are currently available where you can go out and buy them, you should buy them, like, because it supports the game industry and it's good for everyone. But I also always worry about how hard we come down on situations like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I think it puts a certain level of fear, right? Like somebody, let's say 3 years from now, decides, well, I'm going to build a new Switch emulator because we're on to a new console generation. Enough people have moved on and bought Switch 2s.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a sales point anymore to sell, Pikmin 4. And then you look at something like this and you go, well, but do you even start that project? Because what happens if you're 2 years into that project and Nintendo says, oh, we're going to shut you down?
Sure.
Like, is it even worth it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
And so I see that fear, but like, I think you raise good points about where Nintendo is currently and why this might be a fear for them.
Well, and I think the other side of this is creating a loss is like, well, how many of those people would have bought the game if they didn't have access? Like, how is this bringing new people who would not have played it otherwise? Would they have spent $60 on Echoes of Wisdom if it wasn't available for them to emulate? And I don't think that this necessarily like should be the foundation, but there are also $60 is $60. A Switch console being $300 is $300. At what point is just like getting eyes on your product worth slight loss? Granted, Nintendo is big enough they don't have to worry about that problem, but
well, you're making the Adobe argument. So Adobe, who makes Photoshop and Premiere and all those sorts of creative tools, for a long time had sort of a winking relationship with college students that, hey, we kind of understand that a lot of college students are pirating our software. We have no interest in going after college students. We have interest in going after the people who are pirating it to use professionally.
sure.
But like you poor graphic design student who are pirating Photoshop so that you can learn Photoshop, we are potentially building a customer for life.
Sure.
Because we become the default program that everyone knows how to use and everyone uses and wants to use. And when they start in at a company, they say, no, you have to buy me the Adobe Creative Suite. And so, like I talk about this, like, I think it's past the statute of limitations now. Like I definitely pirated, Photoshop in college because I was using it on projects I was working on and I could not afford $800 at that time. So that's always been an argument, right, with piracy when it comes to media. Like, is there potentially a good side to it? Because it is at least exposing people to something that in a lot of cases they weren't going to buy anyway. The Switch emulation may be in danger there. Switching over to Microsoft, they have apparently went out and are seeking feedback from developers on why they're not on the Xbox. So I feel like we've talked about a couple of high-profile issues recently where games were not getting released onto the Xbox. They were getting announced for the PlayStation and PC, but not for the Xbox. I know the Capcom Marvel Fighting Collection was a very famous one in recent months. But I feel like there's been a couple other high-profile games. And so Microsoft has apparently gone out and said, hey, we want to hear from you developers. Why are you not porting your games to the Xbox? Which, seems like the right response. Like people are choosing not to port their games to your system. You should ask why this is happening.
Yeah, it's when I saw this note here, I was like, oh, the next quarterly news about why Microsoft is not doing well this console generation. Sort of another reason to sort of bring it up. I would expect it's a pretty simple answer, right? PlayStation's outselling Xbox like 3-1 or something like that, right? We have just not that many people who've bought an Xbox this generation, and very historically low numbers even compared to the Xbox One, which launched with the Kinect built in, and you had to buy the Kinect sort of there. I've had encounters with Xbox through PC Game Pass, and Game Pass sounds really good initially. I don't know if y'all have ever really dived into it. I feel like I'm always having some additional issue with that Game Pass version of the game that doesn't usually exist on PC. So like Psychonauts 2 came out on Game Pass, and very stuttery, a lot of frame drops, a lot of like not smoothness in the Game Pass version that was never being reported on Steam. And more recently, I tried to subscribe back to Game Pass because I wanted to check out Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. And despite having multiple times subscribed to Game Pass through that same account, all of a sudden now I'm age restricted on the Game Pass on PC. I can't play teen or M-rated games. For some reason, my birthday says 1990. Like, I used to have a kid's account under my parents, but that was like separated a long time ago.
Right.
And just
I like to
wasn't
imagine that
able
Shelby did this.
Yeah.
Like, she got on your account and limiting what he can play.
So brilliant. I've done so much digging in terms of how to fix this, and I have not been able to find anything. And so it was just like within like 2 hours of subscribing back to Game Pass, I was like, no, I'm not messing with this anymore. So yeah, I think it's rather simple. Plus, there's 2 SKUs for Xbox as well. Like you have to develop a Series S version and a Series X version,
Right.
and there's such a big power difference between both of those consoles. Baldur's Gate didn't come out to Xbox initially because they couldn't get the Series S version quite where they up to snuff, I believe, or it had something to do with sort of the feature, or maybe it had something with like co-op, or Series S couldn't run co-op.
I think it was
right
co-op.
on,
Yeah, that was it.
on that. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think their answers, the third party developers' answers would be? Do you think it is just sort of a numbers thing, or is it a?
I mean, that definitely seems like a logical answer, is we're putting in terms of the cost for development, we're going to prioritize the places where it's going to have the best odds of being played and being bought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder too, like you brought up Game Pass. I wonder how much of this is tied into Game Pass, because I've found, like for me, I have an Xbox, but I have Game Pass Ultimate, so it works on my Xbox and my PC. I just don't buy games for the Xbox anymore.
Same.
Like I play games on Game Pass, and like I think the last game I bought for my Xbox was Elden Ring, and I played that on the Xbox. But since then, I don't know that I've bought a game on there, and I wonder how much Game Pass is training people not to buy games. So I wonder how many people are in a similar situation to me, and they're like, this is where I play Game Pass games, but if I want to buy a game, I'm going to buy that on Steam or on PlayStation or on Switch if I want it portable, or maybe Steam if you have a Steam Deck. But I just wonder if there's a lot of people who just aren't buying these third-party games, so it's not even worth their time, right, to develop an Xbox version.
Yeah,
and then
they just don't make as much money. Yeah.
And then, as you noted, like they have to have 2 different working versions, right? They have to have a scaled-down version, let's say, for the S in addition to the X. I can imagine that being kind of challenging.
Yeah. With the last time I was in here, I was talking about how in a terrible state Forza Motorsport sort of was on
right,
and still is mostly. I think it's improved a little bit, but it was one of those things where I was a little bit not like short on money, but I wanted to save a little bit of money. So what I did for Forza Motorsport on Game Pass was I bought just the upgrade to the premium edition. I didn't buy the base game because my idea was like, I'll buy the upgrade now so I get that early access, and then later down the road I'll pay for that full version and then be able to have that. And it was such a bad, rough experience with that game where I never bought the full version of it. I just have the premium version and all those extra cars, but I don't actually have the ability to go in and play the game unless I'm subscribed, but then I might not be able to play it because because I'm age restricted or something like that. So I think for me, it's probably just
that M-rated Forza game.
Yeah. So it's a case I think I'm just going to wait for it to come on sale on Steam and then just start my progress over if I ever feel like that.
Well, so that's a good point because I think we talked about it on here. Forza Horizon 4 is getting delisted soon because of the licenses for the cars and everything.
Yeah.
And so I wanted it because I think that's a pretty good game. I played it on Game Pass, but I didn't own it. So when I bought it on Steam. So Microsoft's still getting that money, but it's not going through the Xbox system. It's going through Valve in that way. And so, I just wonder if a lot of people are doing that, right? They're going to Steam first or PlayStation. I can imagine a lot of people deciding, hey, I'm not going to buy Indiana Jones on the Xbox this fall. I might play it on Steam, on Game Pass, or I might just wait and buy it on my PlayStation.
Yeah, it's definitely that sense of like the devalue, teaching people sort of devalue or, think about the value of their games as less.
Yeah.
And I've seen sort of I've seen comments on how Nintendo sort of does the opposite, where like Nintendo really doesn't go on sale all that much.
Right.
And so
if it does, it's like $10.
Yeah. And so it is much more of a sense of people have that value expectation, and people are actually more likely to probably just buy it when it comes out because they're like, it's not going to go on sale for a while, and when it does, it's not going to be that much.
Right.
And so they're able to kind of keep up software sales despite not caving into sort of people wanting it cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nintendo, they're like black magic that they can do that. Like nobody else in the industry seems to be able to do that in the same way that they do.
Yeah.
Certainly a problem for Xbox. Speaking of other Xbox abandonment issues, they are discontinuing the HoloLens headsets. So these were not specifically game related, but I remember when they first announced these and showed them off to the press, part of the way that they did that was via games. So like they had a version of Minecraft you could play on HoloLens.
You were like a giant in Minecraft, and you could like look around and stuff, right?
Yeah. So for those listening who don't know, HoloLens was their AR goggles, their augmented reality goggles. So a pair of goggles that you would put on, and they would project things into the real world around you. So it wasn't VR. And I'm not surprised to hear that they're discontinuing this. It just is one of those weird things where they made this, there was a lot of hype around it, and then it just sat for years, and they've done nothing with it. And it kind of amused me because about a week ago or so, Meta, Facebook, showed off some augmented reality glasses, and everybody was like, oh, this blows away anything on the market today. This so blows away anything that Apple's trying to do. Apple's trying to sell you a $3,000 headset, and this does things that it can't even possibly think about. And then they were like, oh, by the way, the reason they're not selling these is because they cost over $10,000 a piece to produce. And they're looking at this as something that might go to market in like 4 or 5 years, but like it's nothing they're expecting to be selling in like the next year or two even. And so HoloLens, I thought of HoloLens at that time, something that got announced really early. It never became a viable commercial product. And, this augmented reality headset with Meta seems to be the same thing. Which is disappointing because like it's cool technology and it could be really fun with games, but I wouldn't count on any of these things ever coming out.
Yeah, I would have figured HoloLens would have been gone years ago.
I mean, it basically was for all practical purposes.
Sure.
I think it had some people in specific industries were trying to use it. But I guess it never even took off there. Let's see. Level 5 CEO hints that Nintendo has convinced him to make another Professor Layton game. So apparently the last Professor Layton game, which I did not play, apparently wrapped up the storyline of those games, and he felt very like it was left in a good place. And he announced during an interview recently that they were working on a new game and that a company with a big N might be behind his motivation. So people are, connecting the like obvious dots and thinking
Niantic, that's who it is.
yeah, Niantic is going to be like a Pokemon Go, but with Professor Layton. What would that even be?
Every like a door you enter into is just like a puzzle that you have to solve first.
Hey, I tell you what, if they could actually make that game, that might get me playing one of those Niantic games. That would be pretty cool. As I'm walking through the building, it's just one puzzle after another.
Yeah.
Or Naughty Dog. It's just
Not
more like an
much grittier
Professor
version
Layton,
of
but
Layton.
Uncharted.
Yeah, I know they announced a new Layton. I don't know, it was maybe last year at one of the whatever Nintendo's things are called, Directs.
Correct.
We haven't heard anything about it since, I guess until now. But yeah, I mean that's cool. I've played a couple of them. They're definitely fun, but they're a very particular type of game for, yeah.
They feel like a game from a very particular era, right? Like those games come from the DS, I believe.
Yeah, I think almost all of them are on the DS, if not all of them.
And so it very much feels like, hey, these are DS games. And almost to the point where like if they come out today, you're like, wait, what are you guys doing? Like we don't make these sorts of games anymore. But it's cool that somebody is, right? Like, because those games were a lot of fun at that time. So it's neat to see somebody continue making them.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know if either of you experienced this. And I know, Mario, you do have a PlayStation 5. But PlayStation 5s this week start showing large ads when you were browsing the operating system, the dashboard. And so these were large ads, sometimes for older games that were like no longer something you would think anybody would be that interested in. And people started flipping out online and were like panicking and thinking, oh no, they're going to start putting ads just all over the dashboard. And come to find out that this was some sort of technical error. Like they did not mean to do this at all. So they claim. So those have apparently been fixed and removed. So
yeah, some intern spilled Coke on a on a server or something.
I did not see any of these. Granted, I wasn't browsing all that much, so maybe I just missed them.
yeah.
I saw that wasn't there a big outage on PlayStation Online sort of this week? I thought I heard something about that. Wonder if they're related. I don't know.
I think there was. I feel like, yeah, I can't remember what it was. If it was PlayStation or Xbox, but if you're saying PlayStation, it probably was them. Did have an outage at one point. I don't know. I've gotten to the point where people panicking over like those services going down for a few hours. Like, I get it. If you're really into playing online games, it's a big deal. But my thing is always, well, as long as I can play the games that I already have downloaded, this is not the end of the world to me. But I don't play a lot of online games. So, let's see. Tony Hawk, we talked about that there was, all this sort of teasing of a new Tony Hawk game. Well, Tony Hawk in a new interview has apparently said, quote, there will be a future, unquote, to the Pro Skater series, which seems to be the most like official confirmation yet that Activision is working on something new in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, whether that is a remake in the style of 1 and 2 for 3 and 4, whether it's a Thug remake or this is an entirely new Pro Skater project. It's Tony Hawk is like
6? That'd be 6?
If they number it. I don't know if you number one after
It's been so long.
After part 5 was so terrible.
Well, that's where I wonder if like,
and yeah, because it's been so long.
There will be a future. I also feel like there has to be an innovation as well. The ways that Underground and Underground 2 and all those that kind of followed for a while kind of innovated on the pro skater formula.
Right.
If they have to do something new, to not just because 5 was such a flop, but the 1 and 2 remake, people seem to really enjoy those.
Was 5 American Wasteland? Is that what am I trying to?
No,
5 came
was-
after.
5
American
was its own
Wasteland.
thing. There was
Okay, so it's actually called 5.
yeah. There's one that's actually Pro Skater 5.
Okay.
'Cause-
Which one had like the controller that was like a little like controller on the ground that you could?
That was a skateboard
That
control.
was one of the
Something
Wii
else.
ones.
Okay.
Because there were like, you had the 4 pro skaters, and then you had like 7
Thug.
or 8.
You had Thug 1 and 2.
Yeah, the Undergrounds. You had American Wasteland. You had Project 8. You had
played-
Proving Grounds,
Yeah.
and then you had like 3 or 4 other ones as well that were like felt more like weird side games. You had like a Tony Hawk motion game. You had Downhill Jam. You had a lot of those, and then they made 5.
Downhill Jam used the skateboard.
Is that the
controller.
one?
Okay. That's what
There were 2 games. They actually made 2 games that used that, and I forget what their names are. Maybe it's Downhill Jam and Shred.
Oh, yeah. Because then there were also DS games as well. At least I think Motion was a DS game. And then they had American Skateland, which was essentially a DS version of Wasteland.
Yeah.
I did play the Game Boy Advance Tony Hawk game, but back when that came out, and it was just like totally isometric, like,
Yeah.
sort of skateboard game. And all
But
of
it's
that.
good. It's a pretty good game.
I remember liking it. It was 2003 probably or something like that.
Yeah, some of
but,
those, the Tony Hawk Pro Skaters are like the highest rated games on the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, I mean, I love this series. Like and I love the remake of 1 and 2. So I'm pretty much game for anything. I'd love to see them to do a remake of 3 and 4. Like do the canonical like series. Forget 5, leave that out. But at least do those so that you have all of that remade, and then I'd be interested in them trying something new.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think while there's a generation that would love remakes of Underground, I also don't know how well some of those would age in terms of like the content, with
Right.
it being very like Jackass sort
Right.
of centric. I feel like we have thankfully moved on from a lot of that like era of humor
Thankfully.
and masculinity.
Sadly.
I mean, those are good games.
Oh,
like,
they're
those
great
Thug
games.
games are good.
I love those games.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think, like, how do you remake those in this day and age? Like, so much of those games, the context would be lost.
Yeah.
And probably there's some problematic people in those games that you would have to replace.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially, for sure.
So I don't know. Maybe a game more in that style, right? Like maybe you make not a Thug remake, but a game more in that kind of open world style of those games.
I think that's what they tried to do with Project 8 and Proving Grounds. I never played either of those. I've always been interested in them, but I didn't have a PS2 at the time.
I tried. I think I tried Project 8 for the 360, and it was neat. There was a point where you could slow down and like flick the
Right.
switches, and
Yeah.
based on the combination of motions, you would do kick flips in slow motion.
that's
and
cool.
Stuff. I thought
It was like called Land the Trick or something.
Oh, yeah.
It was like that was the big feature for that year.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think it would definitely be cool to have something like that. But, yeah, I don't know if it could be a full remake of the Undergrounds.
We should know they did make changes to 1 and 2 when they remade them. So like they brought in, they made Tony Hawk actually relevant to his current age.
Yeah.
So and they brought in like some younger skaters.
Is this his daughter that's in the game?
His son is.
Oh, okay.
Like Riley Hawk,
Okay.
who just had a child with Kurt Cobain's daughter.
I think it was you that mentioned that to me.
And like so this made me laugh. I saw a social media post that said Jesus has been born.
The millennial savior.
Yeah, or it's like the Gen X and
Oh,
even more Gen X. I feel like with Nirvana at least. But yeah, that poor kid. Can you imagine growing up with that sort of lineage behind you? So let's see. Avatar: The Last Airbender is getting a new action RPG that will be set thousands of years earlier in its timeline. So it's set around entirely new characters. But this is being developed by Saber Interactive. So Saber Interactive, who made the new
Space Marine.
Yeah, Space Marine 2 game, and has really been kind of firing on all cylinders lately. I feel like everything they've touched lately has been pretty highly thought of, even though they're kind of making these, lower budget sort of games. Like, Space Marine 2 probably isn't really a full AAA game, but it's like a very good AA game, budget wise at least. And so to see them tackling something like this is a good developer behind it.
It's also like I think both of these are slightly more niche franchises as well.
Right.
Huge followings. People love them, but they're not
Fanatical.
the most mainstream of mainstream properties. Yeah. Avatar more so than I think Space Marine, but in terms of the mainstream.
Right.
Especially because they just got that Netflix show as well. But I think
the M. Night movie, which did so much for the franchise.
I've kind of always been surprised there hasn't been one of these RPGs for Avatar. So I feel like we even talked about this. I feel like this was a big question that I was like, I'm surprised that there isn't like an Avatar, The Last Airbender MMO type of game.
Right.
So I think it's very cool. There's a lot to do with that world. So it'll be fun to see what they do.
Yeah, and there's still a very much rabid fan base behind that too, right? Yeah. Like that's one of those shows that kind of came and it went, and you thought, oh, well, people will move on, and people did not move on. And so they've done like the spinoffs and they've done the live action version now. And so I think people are realizing, oh no, this franchise is sticking around.
And I think now that the fan base is older, I mean, it's always treated its content very seriously and it's always dealt with mature themes. But I think now that your fan base is older, you could make a more in-depth, serious game as well. I don't know if that's what they're doing with it, but you could do that.
Yeah. Well, given what they did with Space Marine, right? Like,
sure.
This is a team capable of tackling that more mature material seriously. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Tencent is apparently in talks to potentially purchase Ubisoft or to assist in taking them private. So this is kind of interesting. Ubisoft, it feels like that company is falling apart in real time as we watch. They released the Star Wars Outlaws game. They came out this week and announced that game had sold 1 million copies in its first month, which doesn't really sound terrible, but is apparently far below their expectations of what they were expecting. They have announced that they're doing all sorts of work on that game to bring it up to players' expectations, but they have been getting hammered on social media. Part of it is, sort of your incel audience who's mad that it was a girl as the main character. And there were, even before that game came out, I remember seeing people complaining that the character wasn't pretty enough. And they were like, the voice actress is really pretty. Why is her character so ugly in the game? And I was like, why are you worried about how this character looks in the game? Like, she looks fine. She looks, she's supposed to be sort of a rogue character, like Han Solo. Yeah. So like, I'm not really looking for her to be like a beautiful model or something. But anyways, so people have really been hammering this game pretty hard. The people I know who have played this game seem to like it a lot of times. And
I'm sorry, I missed which game. This is Outlaw?
Yeah, Star Wars Outlaws. So anyways, the stock price of Ubisoft has taken a big dip because of this. They also delayed the next Assassin's Creed Shadows to February. That game was supposed to come out next month, I believe. So it's now coming out in February. So during all this, Ubisoft seems to be collapsing kind of like in real time. It seems like once a week we're getting some big story negatively for them. And so now they're talking to Tencent, which if you're not familiar, Tencent is a Chinese company that has investments in lots and lots of video game companies. And so this may be a full buyout, or it may be a situation where they would take a significant portion of Ubisoft in helping them take the company private. So yeah, it's kind of weird because, there's Ubisoft has always kind of stood out as like the French company in the video game industry. And to see them maybe get bought out by a Chinese company, I guess I have nothing particularly against that, but it's kind of weird to see that happening.
Yeah, I haven't been to. I did try Outlaws from like the Ubisoft version of Game Pass, and probably played it maybe an hour and a half and put it down. I think just things didn't quite feel the way I wanted them to. The stealth felt very finicky, of like, I'm never really sure what the line of sight is here.
That's what a lot of people have complained about.
There's a lot of that feeling of the gameplay that I don't know how they can just like patch that out without just really making huge changes to it.
So apparently they are supposed to be working specifically on some of that stuff.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll see. Yeah,
Well, let's see. So I feel like Christina should be here. We were talking about Until Dawn. I feel like we're doing her dirty. I feel like Christina's never here when we have a really good story about something Christina would really like. So that's her problem. She should be here more often. So the Until Dawn remake is coming out. I think maybe next week that game gets released. And apparently the ending of that game has been slightly altered. They didn't change anything else in the game, but they added a couple of additional cutscenes to the ending, which I have not read what those changes are because I would rather play it and find out. But apparently those changes open the game up for a sequel. Seem to be setting it up for a specific sequel, which is interesting to think about and everything. I really like the original Until Dawn, so I've always wanted to see them do a sequel. They kind of went off and did spiritual sequels, so you got things like The Quarry and the other games that they've been working on over the years that very much are in the vein of this, but this is the one that's most like 80s horror slasher film. Mm-hmm. So if that's really the style of horror film you like, this is the game to play. So it's kind of neat to see them do a direct sequel. Have either of you played Until Dawn?
No,
I did coincidentally have a student bring up that she played Until Dawn yesterday, and so it's quite a weird coincidence. And I was like, I don't even remember this game. And then I looked back, I was like, oh, it's like 2015. I'm like, how do you remember that? And I don't.
Like, how old were you when you were playing that?
Yeah.
Were you old enough to be playing this like M-rated horror game?
Right.
Probably not. So last story here, GSC Game World has released a 90-minute documentary called War Game: The Making of Stalker 2. So this is a game they are making, the Stalker series. And if you're not aware, they are a Ukraine-based developer. So they were just about ready to finish and ship Stalker 2 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's my understanding, I haven't watched this documentary yet, but it was my understanding that some of the people working on this game fled to the Czech Republic and have set up shop there and are working on it. But apparently this deals with not just the development of the game, but like how that invasion affected them. So I know like one of the like lines was, you're sort of thinking like, oh, we might die before we finish this game, which is a sort of wild thing to think about, right? Like video games feel very detached directly from that. Nintendo did delay the Advance Wars remake because of the invasion, but like they eventually released that. And so this really kind of brings this home to the game industry that, these were, not that we didn't know they were real people, but it puts a face to it, right? I think for a lot of people in the game industry, like these are people developing a game that lots of people were really hyped for. Lots of people love that original Stalker Chernobyl game, and to see this, how this is affecting them personally on a human basis, is something we don't deal with a lot in the game industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could be a great sort of comeback story too. And it's how far along is it? Do we have like footage of Stalker 2? Do we have gameplay?
So my understanding is that it is now finished. They're releasing it this year.
Okay, cool. Great.
I don't think it's till late, like December, that they're releasing it. I think that's going to be a Game Pass game as well. So, it's interesting story. So if you're interested in that, I believe the documentary has been publicly released, so I think you can just access and watch it. And it's called War Game: The Making of Stalker 2. All right, that does it for news. Let's move on to our big question of this week. And our question is, have you ever shared a game, like played it or talked about it with a member of your family? So just really kind of thinking, like, is there a game that you kind of associate with, a sibling or your mother, father, or aunt, uncle, cousin, that you really share, and, it's sort of a way of bonding with them. So Scott, why don't we go to you first?
Oh, I have to go first. Okay, I was.
If you don't want to, I can go to Mario.
Okay.
Mario looks gung-ho to go.
If you're good, yeah.
So I think I interpreted this question differently at first. So to answer it how I first interpreted it, when I was thinking about sharing a game, like I was thinking a game that I really enjoyed that I encouraged somebody to look into and play, and that was Celeste with my stepsister. And I think she struggled with it. It was maybe harder than she wanted it to be or was ready for. But I know her fiance got it shortly after she did, and he finished it and really enjoyed it. So I think about that, and I think that was like also a good marker of, I really do love Celeste as a game. It's one that I wish I could like more enthusiastically recommend to people, but it's also a game that I've played so much where the difficulty doesn't really like hit anymore. Like,
right.
So it's one that I always have to like sort of take a step back and rethink about like whether or not I could genuinely recommend it to somebody.
Yeah, that's always rough, right? Like when there's a game you really like and you want to recommend it to people, but you think, oh, this game is probably way more complicated or way more difficult than somebody who's more casual is going to like appreciate. Mm-hmm. Let's say. I run into that with films all the time. Like I'll go see a movie and I really love it and I want to recommend it to everyone I know, and then I'm like, oh no, nobody I know is going to like this movie. There's a movie called The Lobster, which have you seen?
I haven't. It's one that I've wanted to see, but I do know what movie you're talking about.
So I really liked that movie, and somebody asked me, had I seen anything good lately? And I said, yeah, I have, but I'm not going to recommend it to you because you won't like it. I can tell you right now, you're not going to like this movie. Mm-hmm. And so that's always a little frustrating because, like, I think if you like art, part of the joy of art is sharing it with someone else.
Sure.
Yeah.
But another game that I would think, and this was weird because he was, very much not a video game player. He would do it to like appease me every once in a while, was playing games with my dad. And whenever I think of like the football games, whether it be the Maddens, but especially the NFL street games, because in their sort of arcadiness, you would have these like really silly, weird plays. Whenever something like that would happen in one of those games, it was me calling out to him you have to at least come watch this play. Even if you don't play, you don't want to pick it up, you have to at least come watch the craziness of this. So whenever I think about those games, those, he's who I think of.
And was he a football fan?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So he could at least appreciate why this is so zany.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's great. Like, it's always fun. Like, people who aren't into video games, if you can find that video game. I think about Alicia with her mom and Power Wash Simulator.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because her mom worked at a Power Wash company that produced and sold those. So, like, she could talk to her mom about Power Wash Simulator, which is, like, just the most bizarre, random thing that you could, like, discuss. But, yeah. Scott, have you had some time to think?
Yeah. I mean, I guess short term, I did end up sort of a family member. Okay. Long term, I sort of go back to a game called Snowboard Kids. I don't know if y'all remember this game. It was a game developed by Atlas way
for the N64.
For the N64, and then there was Snowboard Kids 2, and then for a while, Atlas was like, there seemed to be a lot of interest in most recent years about like classic Atlas games, and they're like, we may be going back and sort of remaking some classic games, and I've always been like sort of like, please remake Snowbird Kids 1 and 2. But that was a game that I played and had talked about and shared with my dad way back sort of in the day. One of the first games I remember having like Rumple feedback in and all of those kinds of things. That's sort of that fun mix of like SSX and like Mario Kart sort of style, where it's just very, very arcadey but like also sort of almost like Japanese anime kind of style characters that were fun to watch and listen to.
And wasn't that like 4-player on the N64?
It was 4-player. Yeah. It was one of those that was 4-player, and can't get much better than that. Lost art, split screen.
I feel like that was really unique among the glut of snowboarding games we got there, like Cool Borders and SSX and a lot of those. Like, that was one thing that set that game apart. Was I think it was the only one that had like 4-player split screen.
I think the thing about Snowboard Kids that I will always think about and appreciate that was different as well was because you did like multiple loops of whatever you call it, the trail. The chaos that would happen down at like the gondola that would then bring you back up to the
was everyone smacking into the wall.
That is incredible.
All right. So I was thinking, like, we had a Commodore 64 when we were kids. So my brother and sister and I remember playing a game called Halley's Comet. And Halley's Comet was a game where you had to, I'm still not 100% sure. I think the goal of the game was to land on Halley's Comet. So you were like a spaceship and you have to land on Halley's Comet, but you're having to time all of this right? Because Halley's Comet only comes around once every, 72 years, 76 years or something. And I remember us spending so much time on that game, and I think not really fully understanding what we were supposed to be doing with it, because it was a computer game that was a little bit more advanced and complicated. So there were games on the Commodore that were real simple to pick up and play, but that one was more complicated. I've heard over the years lots of people say that game is one of the games that just perplexed them when they were trying to play it. And I remember us just spending a huge amount of time upstairs in our house where my brother and my bedrooms were. And the three of us kind of sitting around just trying to figure out that game and get our way through it. And we did that with some other games. Amazon for the Commodore 64 is another example. But that one, because it was all three of us. And so I remember, different combinations of us playing it at different times, trying to figure it out. And I don't remember all three of us playing video games together like that. Maybe we'd had an N64 with Mario Kart, but this was years and years before that. So, that's a memory of a game I remember sharing quite a bit with family.
I do love that sense of playing when you're the childlike feeling of playing a game and you're not playing it right, but it doesn't matter, You're just like, I'm just doing my own thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just doing something. I'm walking around and I love it anyway,
Well, and even that, part of the experience is like almost at a meta level of you figuring out how the game is supposed to be played, right? And I feel like that doesn't exist nearly as much now because everything's tutorialized in games. So like there's not as much confusion anymore. You know, I would say like a modern equivalent of this might be something like Kerbal Space Program, where even if, like, I mean, that sort of does tutorialize you, but at the same time, you're still going to have no idea what you're doing when you start playing that game. And so like, I think those style of games like just don't really get made nearly as much anymore. And yeah, I think you're right. There's something kind of fun, that like childlike innocence of, well, I don't even know how this game works, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to bash my head into it. Cause as you said earlier, Mario, you have almost unlimited time as a kid. Like something, as you get older, you realize, oh man, I'll never have that sense of just unlimited time just to sit here and play this terrible game until I figure it out. Which is maybe why when we go back and play those games as adults, we're very disappointed in them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that does it for this week's episode. Thank you for those of you tuning in, listening. As always, you can find more content by going to salukigames.com. Thank you, Mario and Scott, for joining me, as always. And we will be back soon with another episode. Until then, go check out some of the games we talked about this week. Go check out Zelda. It is worth your time. I think most people will get a kick out of that game. So we'll be back soon.